suppose it's time to tell you what happened inside the magical space pussy. You can believe me or not. What do I care? I'm the guy who's been inside the magical space pussy. My life has been pretty much downhill since then. I mean, fuck Neil Armstrong. What did he see? Bunch of gray rocks? Big fucking deal. I saw a cooch growing out of the side of a canyon. Top that, NASA, you tang-drinking cocksuckers. Anyways, where was I? Oh, yeah. Uncle Adolf. So I was living in Death Valley, hanging out with the Manson family, and Charlie kept mentioning this guy, Uncle Adolf, and I figure he's talking about Hitler because he's sort of into this white supremacy thing. But then I started realizing that he's talking about a guy who's still alive. Then one day, the guy showed up. They asked me to come over to their cabin, and this old guy was sitting there. White hair, deep tan, lined face, pale eyes. He introduced himself as Adolf, and he's got a German accent. He made no secret of the fact that he was an ex-Nazi. This made me nervous. That's kind of something you keep under your hat. And he said he found Charlie at Berkeley, that Charlie was perfect for my purpose. I asked what his purpose was. He said, testing. I kinda shrugged because I didn't really give a shit about his little coy answer, and I got up to leave when this mongoloid motherfucker they called Clem punched me straight in the face. And suddenly, I was on my ass. There were a couple of girls there, and they jumped on me and held me down and tied my hands behind my back. If I had known what they had done to Sharon Tate, I would have been unspeakably terrified. But as it was, I was merely, really scared. They tossed me into the back of the dune buggy and drove out into the desert. It was midday, and the sky was just one giant glare. They drove for over an hour, and eventually they got me out and hauled me down into this deep sandy arroyo, and they started marching me down it. They had put wooden stakes into the ground at various points, and when we came to them, they seemed to be really careful to always stay in between the stakes. Later, they had chains tied between the stakes, and we all had to go under the chains like some kind of obstacle course. I didn't know what to make of it. I had a lot to process at the time. I started to notice that the rock walls of the arroyo were abnormal. There were strange striations through the rock, and what looked like the cross-sections of giant insect tunnels. I'd never seen rocks like that. The whole thing was just very alien. Then I started to hear the screaming. Up ahead I could hear people's voices. Thousands of voices, all of them screaming and howling at once. Slowly, incredibly, the screaming changed into a kind of laughter, an insane laughter. Giggles and chuckles and titters. I wondered if it was in my head. If I was so scared that my mind had cracked, or if they had dosed me with LSD or something. Finally, we went around a bend in the arroyo, and, well, there it was. They said it would be a pussy, and I guess it kind of looked like one. Maybe after some kind of drastic dildo mishap. It was just flesh. Wrinkled, lobbed, flabby flesh, growing out of the rock like mold or something. It had hair, and pores, and freckles. Some of it was pale, some of it was black. It was taller than me. And in the center, there was an opening. Pink and wet, just like a vagina. The crowd told me he wanted me to see its level of development. He took a revolver from one of the girls and pointed at my face, told me to walk inside. So it was either get shot, or go into the big mangled pussy. It was honestly a tough choice. There was something really fucked up, completely not right about that thing. Something in my bones told me not to go into it, not to go near it, to just take the bullet in the head. But I figured maybe I could go in just a little bit, and then wait for them to leave and get the hell out of there. Not a great plan, but the best I could come up with. So, I went in. The entrance was just barely wide enough to slip into it. All I could see was glistening pink flesh ahead. There was a sound like laughter, and then screaming, and then laughter that was coming from deep inside. The walls were blood warm on my shoulders, and the smell was, well, what you might expect. Not great. Let's just say it was not great. I pushed forward, and the walls kind of gave way and found myself moving through this slimy, suffocating flesh. And I'm starting to panic because my hands are still tied behind my back. And I'm feeling like I'm about to choke on this stuff. And the walls are moving, like pulsating. I feel like I'm being digested. Then, suddenly, I'm pushed through into this kind of chamber. Talk about the frying pan and into the fryer. The chamber was just a nightmare. I mean, I've just never seen that. It was unholy. There were faces and heads and legs, all kind of fused together. The walls were just all these crawling limbs and these terrified faces and fusions of teeth and cheeks and hair and fingers coming out of knees and just all those people. Were they still people? Had they ever been people? Had they been made a part of that thing? I started to scream. Everything around me was screaming. All the mouths on the walls were screaming. And I was screaming too. Then I was laughing. And I felt hands and mouths all over my body. And they were tickling me, touching me all over. Then I was screaming again. I had to get out of there. I had to get out of the nightmare. I started pushing back towards the entrance, but the hands were all over me. I felt something bite into my hip. A mouth was biting me. I screamed at the sharp pain and moved away from it. I started to think that maybe I could get one of the mouths to bite through my ropes, and then I would at least have my hands free. I struggled to turn around and move the ropes towards the mouth, but just when I got in position, the mouth bit right into my finger instead. The pain was incredible, but I was giggling, just laughing and laughing. The mouth pulled the flesh from my finger like it was a chicken wing. Another mouth bit into my shoulder. I was chuckling away at this point. The hands were grabbing me, pulling on me, pulling me apart, tearing my arms right out of their sockets. Fingers were digging in between my ribs. I was slathered in blood and screaming as the fingers dug into my eyes. Well, I guess at this point you're probably wondering how I, your interpreted narrator, managed to escape the bottomless pit. How I managed to survive to tell you this tale, I simply didn't. I never escaped the bottomless pit. I am the bottomless pit. I am the tree of life. The North Korea situation 1980s was unique, as most North Korean situations are. They built something we haven't seen before or since, an independent flesh interface of enormous size and power, but within a contained incident zone and no metallic cylinders. We detected it via the cosmic ray information signature, which was concentrated on a secure, shielded facility outside the Hwasong prison camp. This was a huge underground facility, which they had been constructing for over a decade. We anticipated that they would construct a portal-level interface, and we were fully prepared to bomb it before it became uncontained. What we didn't expect is that it would achieve level 7 cosmic transmission rates without all the other normal signs of full-fledged portal. We considered bombing it anyways, or using our brilliant Pebble's kinetic orbital strike system, but instead we managed to get 2 agents into the facility to take a look at it. They achieved high-level security clearance and found that the Koreans were using the flesh interface as an information processing facility. This was quite novel, as we had always considered it to be a potential weapon system. Our curiosity was truly piqued. Clearly, the Norks knew something we didn't. Unfortunately, our agents weren't able to access the enormous mainframe chamber, which actually housed the interface. All they knew was that it was in a huge chamber full of temperature-regulated water. We instructed them to breach the chamber and get a look at it, then send us the data by satellite. We knew full well that it would probably cost them their lives, but we pumped them up with a lot of do-it-for-the-planet rhetoric. So one night they put on dive suits and went into the chamber. It was basically like a huge lake contained within a massive, darkened steel box. Imagine a flooded warehouse with endless rows of dim ceiling lights shining down on rippling black water. They jumped into the water. And pretty quickly, they picked up on some pretty interesting audio signals with varying frequencies. A kind of squeaking, mewling sound. They recognized the sound for what it was right away, but had a hard time believing it. Whale songs. The chamber contains several adult humpback whales. How do I explain Mother? What is she? The translation from Greek to English states, Great Babylon, the mother of prostitutes, and the abominations of the earth. I used to lie in my bed, the blinds pulled against the summer sunlight, listening to the sounds of other kids playing outside. I lay there for hours, not sleeping, wondering who had made Mother. She was made from all different sorts of animal parts. One of her feet was a big, heavy hoof. The other was a tiny little kitten paw. I could hear her clumping around downstairs. Her smell, the smell of cigarettes and disease. It was everywhere in the house, pooling in the darkness. Slowly, night would come, and I would imagine floating out of my window, floating up into the deep starry blue, looking down at all the houses, shrinking into tiny boxes. A clean breeze blowing on my face. How I would cry in my little bed. I was very young when Mother first came. I had another mom before her. A good one. who wore pearls and had a voice like music. Then one day, I got sick. A fever. I was crying all day. And it went on for weeks. I guess my first mom couldn't take it anymore. One night she left forever. When I came down for breakfast the next morning, this new thing was waiting for me in the kitchen. At least, I think that's what happened. Mother never talked. She just snorted and made hoarse sounds. Awful. Her parts were sewn together with yarn, and there were patches of wet burlap. I didn't see her eyes until she had been there for almost a year. Have you ever seen a horse's eyes close up? They're like goat's eyes. They have a sideways pupil. I would come home after school, and there would be kids sitting at the breakfast table. She gave them medicine so they did whatever she wanted them to. It made them just sit there, staring and shaking. Then she would take them down in the basement and make them into things. She tried to make me do it too, but I didn't want to. I realized she was afraid of the Bible. I realized it had power, blood power. When I read it to her, her different pieces would shudder and pull apart, and she would howl like a wolf, and blood would run from her segments. The Bible brought transmissions from the cross that floated in the red summer sky. Everything in time is arranged around the epicenter, wherein the nail drove into Christ's hand. Lines of possibilities radiate outward from it. Kingdoms rise and fall. Men grow and die like flowers in a field. Revelations 17:8. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. So, 2 of our agents had breached the underwater chamber containing the North Korean flesh interface, and found nothing but several humpback whales. Now this was a head-scratcher. We knew it was a flesh interface because it was receiving information-rich rays coming from outer space. Yet how could it be taking the form of humpback whales? All previous interfaces had taken on a decidedly less conventional form. Well, our agents decided to get a closer look. There were 3 whales, 2 adults and a calf. They appeared normal in every aspect, though it was difficult to get a close look at them. They seemed to be in quite a bit of distress. Though the agents were not biologists and had a limited understanding of what whale distress looks like, the agents noticed some very loud, low-frequency percussive sounds coming from the bottom of the chamber, which was entirely hidden in darkness, so they headed down towards the bottom, a distance of several stories. There, they shined their lights around and made a fairly alarming discovery. Bones. Enormous, curving rib bones and jaw bones and vertebrae. They were apparently whale bones. They also noticed a large, circular gate on the floor of the chamber, which was closed at the time. At this point, one of the agents began to panic. He had come to the conclusion that the whales were not the interface itself, but merely food for the interface. which was perhaps being held in another chamber below this one. There were some problems with his theory. Why use whales, a fairly rare and very difficult animal to corral, when they could just use a large amount of smaller fish? Well, it's all just speculation. The agents quickly swam out of the chamber and never found out what was behind the gate, if anything. Later, they gave us some very valuable information on the facility's information processing capabilities, which were staggering and quite appalling to imagine in the hands of such a regime, such as the DPRK. Since there was no incident zone and segmentation wasn't an issue, we were able to solve the problem quite neatly by releasing a nerve agent into the water chamber. The cosmic ray download stopped shortly thereafter, indicating success, though it did result in the loss of both agents and a major loss of life at the facility overall. Anyways, that was our first encounter with an MBIS, Massive Biological Information System, and a near encounter with what we would later come to call a skin ship. Its destruction has allowed for the continued validity of prime number-based encryption systems, though some of the secrets uncovered by the DPRK during that time have forced us into the unpleasant position of supporting the regime. Blackmail, basically.